Hey, welcome back to the Quiet Light Brokerage podcast. I'm super excited to have Elliott Holland. Elliott, I keep saying your name wrong. Elliott Holland from Guardian Due Diligence. Obviously, you're in the due diligence space, but your background is super interesting. Started out as a search funder, which would be looking for deals backed by private equity or family offices, and then morphed in 2017 into this due diligence firm, which is doing both offline and online deals, doing everything from QOV to quality of deals to reviewing marketing materials, really helping out buyers in that process of trying to make sure that they're making a good acquisition. And look, my recommendation has always been, if you're going to spend this much money, using a due diligence company is good, just a good sense. Real quick, before we jump in, I just want to remind people this is sponsored by Quiet Light Brokerage. We have been around for 14 years, helping entrepreneurs in the online space prepare and exit their businesses for maximum value. We work on the sell side, so we're on the different side than Elliott is for the most part, but we work hand in hand on these deals. So, hey, welcome, Elliott, after that very quick, kind of messy intro.
Hey, no, good to be here. It's exciting. You know, I know you guys in the marketplace, so it's exciting to be here speaking to you.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk to somebody that works, I say on the other side of the table, but really, you know, due diligence companies and advisors like we are, I think we work not adversarially. I think we work hand in hand. You know, maybe there's a disagreement at some point on valuations or collaborative effort, but we're trying to get a good deal done at the end of the day, right?
Both of us are trying to get a good deal done, and the negotiation around a good deal is just that, right? I mean, there's a buyer angle, there's a seller angle, and when they meet, a good deal gets done.
That's right. I love boiling things down to this level of simplicity, and I've done this on just hundreds of deals that I've been the advisor on, especially when we see that butting heads, right? And you've been there where
of course, like
they're fighting, and I just say, okay, let's back up.
Right.
You want to buy.
Yes.
Everything else are details.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Everything else is details, and there are a lot of sharp elbows in this business, right? Maybe a little bit less in some of the smaller deals that we deal with, but in the medium and larger size deals that we deal with, people have sharp elbows. When people are putting, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars up, they should be very prudent and thoughtful. But at the end of the day, sharp elbows can ruin good deals. And so I think on both sides, we have to sometimes grab our client and put them in timeout, as weird as that may be, to enable them to see that a good deal is sort of in the midst, right? And don't overlook it because there's $1 of EBITDA missing, or the buyer won't give you the deal that you want the exact way you want. He might want it prime or 10 degrees different, right?
You know, my business partner, Joe Valley, used to tell clients when they started with him, he said, I'm going to ask you to write down what you want to see out of this deal on a piece of paper. I want you to put in an envelope and put it in your desk drawer.
Yeah.
That's it. And then when you would get into due diligence and we would get those sharp elbows that you talk about, he would say, remember that envelope I told you? Go grab that, take a look at it. I want you to see what your original expectations were, because they change, right?
Yes. That's smart. I think even more on your side maybe than mine. But again, I don't think we're adversarial. Just it's interesting because by the time a seller decides they want to sell, talks to their family, whatever, finds you guys, for instance, right? Between that day and closing a good deal, it can be months, sometimes even over a year, depending on how picky people are in the market. And so you're right, what they want day one can get lost in all the conversations they have with their friends. That company 10 times the size, they went for a way steeper multiple. The fact that they think their business is worth 10 million because 10 million sounds good. And then, on my side with the buyers can see a deal at a reasonable price and all of a sudden convince themselves they need to take 25% off of the price, or they don't like the 5th iteration of the working capital, or the 7th biggest online agent of sales isn't as big as they thought, and forget that there's a great business. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've already dug into some content already, which is awesome. But let's back up. I want to talk about how you got into this, because you started in a field which we know well here at Quiet Light. We've worked with a lot of people that would fall into this sponsor category, right? The search funder type category. Can you explain to the audience just what you did before this, how that worked, and then how you parlayed that into Guardian Due Diligence?
Sure. So when I left Harvard Business School, my first jobs after that were in private equity. So formal institutional capital meant to go buy companies. And so my start in the business came from that. But I was working for more family office, more independent groups. And so that's sort of in my blood. I then rolled out and started a independent sponsor. They call them self-funded searchers. There's a million names for them. Fundless sponsor, investment firm with a mentor of mine called Ellsworth Partners, and we bought companies $1 million to $5 million in EBITDA, both online and offline. And then I started my own firm, Spartan Capital, that was doing essentially the same kind of thing with just by myself after my partner retired. And so around that time, 2017, I started Guardian. But if you think about what that means, is that I'm in sort of year 10 of evaluating, assessing, and running processes in sort of small and medium business deals, both offline and online, from the seat of a buyer working for others, a buyer working for myself, and now an advisor. And so I understand the owner persona, I understand the buyer persona, I understand the advisor persona. And so my background is a bit different than some other advisors in my space that come from more CPA or financial analysis core backgrounds. I'm more like an applied deal guy. Is probably one way to say it.
Yeah, that fits really well with the Quiet Light approach, right? Because everyone in Quiet Light, we're all entrepreneurs first. We've all bought and sold businesses before we started in this field of advising, right? So the same sort of background where we've been in the shoes of the buyer, we've been in the shoes of a seller, we've done larger acquisitions. Most of the advisors at Quiet Light were actually clients before they came on board with us as advisors. So a lot of affinity there between backgrounds, except for the Harvard Business School. I wanted to go, and then life got in the way.
I'm still fun to hang out with. So don't hold it against me.
No, we love Harvard. I actually had I had some of the professors that teach the ETA course on the podcast a long time ago.
You had Udkoff and Ruback?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Okay. I had Royce on. I'd been working with the ETA course for a while.
Okay.
So
Royce actually helped me craft my messaging to get my first job in private equity.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Look at that.
I have a huge amount of respect for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, if you see my background, you can't see my background. It's behind me. I have their book that they put out, the guide. Business. Yeah. So
absolutely.
Yeah, cool. People are listening live as we're finding our connections here. Love it. Sorry. So how did you parlay this into Guardian Due Diligence? When did you decide or see the need that, there's a need out there, not for the mid-market $50 million, $75 million deal, because there's a lot of people that want to play that space, right? It's lucrative.
Yeah.
But that sub $25 million enterprise value, and really, I mean, for a lot of our listeners, they're looking at the mid high six figures, 7 figures, maybe low 8 figures would be the very cap.
Right.
Where did you see that opportunity?
Well, as a buyer myself, and for 6 years, I was an independent buyer, I saw not only how difficult it is to get good deals done, which, Mark, you can write the book on that as well, right? But also how difficult it is to find good, cost-effective, efficient, smart, deal-oriented advisors, and you need them like you need oxygen during this process, right? And when you get guys that are, highfalutin with a bunch of credentials and they charge you $400 an hour and their number 2 guy is $300 an hour and then their analyst is $150 and you ask them for a price and they can't give it to you. Or, hey, what's involved in the quality of earnings? Well, they're all different and this and that and that and this. And, oh, by the way, you got me in my busy season. So I can get to you in 4 weeks and your seller is going to kick you out of the process in 4 weeks. I just saw how difficult it was to get deals done. That's not to mention that I think operating a private investment firm, or even you and your buddy looking at deals, operating a due diligence process plus keeping some sort of gas on the pedal around deal sourcing is like 150% of your capacity. So now add to that the complexity of finding good advisors. I just knew the whole ecosystem was wrought with opportunity. So I started Guardian to serve that customer need, to sort of be the solution that I wanted when I was in the buyer seat, and to be very specific about delivering the things that I knew were needed, would have helped, and really helping, I think, a whole set of acquisition entrepreneurs execute good transactions.
Yeah. And I love where you're coming from with this, right? This idea that managing an acquisition is a multi-faceted operation as far as the number of skill sets that you really need to have. And you can branch these down even further. Due diligence, being able to do a good due diligence, not a single discipline, right? It's a multiple discipline type of tool.
Absolutely.
Skill.
And I mean, even go further than that, if you back up, because we do more than quality of earnings, if you think, so diligence is what I called it because people know that they need a QOE and they need a legal doc to get a deal done. So if you're thinking sort of brass tacks, the QOE is sort of the one that kind of puts you in the game. But really our services start from deal sourcing to evaluation to honestly negotiating with guys like you, the whole litany of things. And you got to be a business person, entrepreneur, a finance person, valuation, a psychologist, a negotiator, a assessor of risk, a master of timing, a master of tact, and all these things take years and years and years to develop. And so it's tough even for people that have like deep levels of expertise in many of them to execute all of them. And oh, by the way, when you're putting $1 million plus up, whether it's your capital or you're getting debt, the consequences of making bad choices are severe here.
Yeah, and the stress that that puts on every single level, and trying to keep a clear head. I mean, the I wouldn't say the number one problem, but a problem that you see in deals all the time is people losing the focus simply because of the stress of the deal, right? It's not necessarily.
I can't tell you how many times I was beyond myself. I mean, I have so many like release valves for stress now that, and also like the funny, as you get better at this stuff, you actually start breathing slower in the most intense negotiations, but that took years to develop.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It takes. I remember I've told the story a few times on the podcast, but one of the advisors, I was selling his business before he became an advisor. And I remember he was selling his business, and the person buying his business, it was 2 days before close. The business was having a record day of sales in a bad way. I mean, it was just like not what you want to have happen a couple of days before close. And I was in my car. I called him because we needed to get a few things close to being done. Yes. Right. And so I called him. I'm like, hey, do you know when you're going to get X, Y, and Z done? He lit me up to no end about pressuring him. This, that. I mean, it was vicious. And I remember thinking, all right, he's venting, he's de-stressing.
Right.
Everything worked out. We closed the deal. I got the phone and said, look, we'll talk later. I apologize. Let's just talk later. We got the deal done. I talked to him about a year later, and a few months later, and I brought it up to him.
Right.
He didn't remember the conversation. He didn't remember doing that at all. And I didn't press him on it, but I think it was just that intense stress of the moment.
I'll also tell you, there's times that the stress gets so intense that I purposefully bury it.
Really?
Oh yeah. Because if I thought about it too long, it would taint the sort of macro good decision that was made. Right. So to your point, deal got done. If you're talking to him a year later, he did all right. Yeah. And so now the good deal benefit far supersedes whatever was going on that day. And that's the other thing about deals is you have to constantly prioritize, right? Yeah. And then the priority might change 25 times in a single day. I mean, it's just like, and you're sort of, in an entrepreneurial sense, you're always going after the biggest problem, right? Or the one that's going to most significantly impact your deal that day. And I mean, so you're juggling all the time.
Yeah. And to your point, yeah, I didn't bring this up to grind an axe or anything with him. It was more of, hey, do you remember that time? And kind of reminiscing. And he was like, what are you talking about? I was like, nothing. Forget about it.
Yeah, forget about it. It's not even a big deal. Yeah. Forget about it.
Yeah, forget about it. All right, let's get some useful tips. I'd love to hear some of your war stories. I told you one of mine in due diligence, and also maybe get some tips, right, for somebody going into this process, if they wanted to try it on their own, which I don't necessarily, especially if it's your first time, I don't recommend trying it on your own.
Yeah, not at all.
But love to hear some of your war stories and some of the things that have stood out, some of the things you've learned over 10 years of doing this here.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think one of the things I've learned is that no matter what size of the business, online or offline, there are certain things that every business has somewhere. It might not be in the spreadsheet, it may not be in the QuickBooks, it may not be in the Google Analytics, but they have it somewhere. And so everybody has financials, everybody can put them into a monthly basis. So if people say they don't have it, that's hogwash. Everybody has a customer list. Everybody, if they have any significant assets, they have an asset list. If they have revenue from multiple streams, I'm sure they spent the profit from those streams. So I'm sure they know where the money came from. And so one of the things that I would encourage people to initially settle into is that you, as a buyer, because I represent the buy side, need to be patient enough to know that that data exists, even if you can't get it from the intermediary at that time. For whatever reason, that person may be protecting their client. The data is there. And so you're going to have to get it sooner rather than later. But there's a set of data available. Stories are the best. I mean, one of the saddest stories, I remember I was looking at a company that installed commercial cameras and control access doors out of just north of Dallas, Texas. And I was hot on the industry. The financials came back solid. The seller sounded reasonable. So I put in a letter of intent. The guy wanted to see me before he was going to accept it. So he's operating off of QuickBooks. So I had pretty good data. So I get down to Texas. I drive up. I meet him at a Starbucks because he didn't want his people to know just yet. And as soon as he's walking up to the Starbucks, Mark, before we can even get in there and get my pipe place, he's like, "Oh, you'll never believe this, man. Our QuickBooks went down this morning." Like, how could that happen on the day that you come? Our freaking QuickBooks it blew up. I can't get to it. I got my bookkeeping lady on it. And Mark, I'm sitting there and I almost turned the car around and went back to the airport and flew back to Atlanta. But people who know me will get, I said, I need to learn this lesson on how much this guy's willing to lie. So I sat through another day of interviews with his sales team, conversations with him, so I could fully understand how many ways he was trying to pull the fleece over my eyes. But that's the kind of stuff that, oh, by the way, I didn't tell the best part of the story, which is terrible. So anybody who knows about QuickBooks, the cloud version, what he was telling me is that QuickBooks Intuit went down for 24 hours. If anybody believes that, I've got oceanfront property in Minneapolis to sell you. So I'm like, hold on, there's no need to call Intuit on this. This guy's blowing smoke. So I had that. I mean, heck, I've had situations where I've been on not a customer visit, a seller meeting, flown out somewhere to go see someone. I had a guy who increased the price on me 25% at dinner. We had a whole day of meeting with the guy. He sits down with us and something made him want to increase the price 25%. I've seen, and something else to sort of look for before I kind of close this piece and we can hop into more if you think it's relevant. Oftentimes, you need to take a look at the documents that govern how a company can sell. So I might have a business partner or a bunch of silent partners. And as the person that makes most of the decisions, I might say, oh, you only have to worry about me. I make the decision. But when you actually look at the operating agreement or the bylaws, it takes unanimous consent to sell. And I've gone down processes very far when I was in the buyer's seat that didn't consummate because 3 of the partners that needed for unanimous consent did not like the deal. So I can go on and on and on, but there's war stories. And then what you have to understand is there's diligence rules that operate on the other side of them once you experience them. And that's what the benefit of having an advisor gives you.
Yeah. Those sellers had poor sell side advisors. If I can be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. For someone to lie about QuickBooks Online going down is actually pretty rich.
Hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the most, it's close to the most egregious I've heard. I won't go over the most egregious situations I've heard. I don't want to scare people too needlessly. Well, yeah. What are like this idea of people lying? I think this is actually a good thread to go on because when you're buying a business, there's always that question of, can I trust? And we talk about this all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Offers are made based off numbers, but deals consummate based on trust at the end of the day, right? Trust and verify. And, And if you can't verify to the point of trusting, the deal's not going to happen, or it should happen. And that's a two-way street, right? It's got to go both ways. What are some things that you recommend to your clients as far as vetting somebody, right? And just, how do you tell if somebody's telling you the truth? Obviously, if you catch them in a bald lie like that, that's pretty obvious. But then second of all, what are some things that you do to try and lay down the foundation for a good deal where, look, there's mutual respect and the buyer and seller can be like, looking at each other, I trust you. We're still going to go through this process, but you're an upstanding person and I want to do a deal with you. Right.
So let me start from the second question and move to the first, because on the buyer side, I think you can screw it up from the beginning, particularly if you're a new buyer. So when you first start out as a buyer, everybody line up 100 new buyers, right? Especially like went to college, think you know some finance, whatever. The first meeting you're going to have with the seller, you're going to want to have a list of like 50 questions that you want to ask. And I'm going to nail them with question 37 and 17. Oh, I'm going to get them. And you start ticking off these questions, right? And you totally forget who you're talking to. You're talking to an entrepreneur who started a business, who got it to the point where you were interested in buying it. And now you're like, like clipboard questioning him like he's in the principal's office. And you forgot the fact that this is a free man or a free woman that before you buy their business doesn't have to answer to anyone. You mess up a lot of trust in that. Get to know the person, understand their motives, be a good steward. I'm a big fan of How to Win Friends and Influence People. You speak in other people's terms, not your own. That's the first way you convey trust to your seller. I think the second way you do it is all of the touch points between the first time you meet somebody like Mark and his guys at Quiet Light to the closing table. When you say you're going to deliver something, deliver it at that date or before. And if it's going to be late, which happens in diligence, tell them. And if you can call them and tell them, calling's better than emailing. But tell them you're going to be late. But each point is giving that person confidence in whether you can deliver that big check that you're going to have to deliver to buy the company. And so those missed deadlines and other capacities don't matter as much as this one. Now let's flip it. Go ahead.
For those that are listening in the car or somewhere else, not watching this on YouTube, my head's about to fall off because I'm nodding so much about that. But this game is so much about managing expectations. And on the sell side, I can tell you, especially first-time sellers, they don't believe you're going to come through with a check. Like, just assume that that's the starting position. And so when you fail to deliver on expectations during that due diligence process, it doesn't seed sows of doubt. It confirms the seeds of doubt that are already there. Yes. So if I could just emblazon what you just said there, if you're going to miss a deadline, cool, I get it. It's hard work to buy a business, right? And you're going to miss some deadlines. You're going to have some more questions in your first round.
Right.
Well, communicate.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. I couldn't.
No, I think that's perfect. Well, what I think people will like listening to this podcast particularly is I represent the buyers that negotiate against the sellers that Mark works for. Think about all the times we've agreed already. And I'm not being nice just because, it's Mark. I'm telling the straight truth. So there's a lot of commonalities here. The other thing I think related to that is this is not a situation where you get perfect data. There are things that a seller will tell Mark that seller will never tell you, that Mark will never tell you. And not off of being particularly or maliciously avoidant, but just they're so specific, nuanced, hard to communicate, difficult to go past that they're not going to be told. So for instance, when the seller says, hey, Mark, I don't think this Elliott guy can close. You might get that the second or third time the seller tells him that, because at that point, Mark's sort of like, if you don't tighten up, this thing is done. But you're not going to hear that, right? And what I would encourage people on both sides to do, particularly like new acquisition entrepreneurs, I said, don't bring the clipboard with the 50 questions. Be involved in the communication so you pick up some of the nuances of it, so that when people are communicating things indirectly or through nonverbals that they can't really say directly or in email, that you're not the dude or the gal that just lets it go over your head.
Yeah, no, and that's right. I mean, and yeah, there are conversations that happen, right? And much of what we do on our side, and you on your side as well. You said this already. Sometimes it's putting your client in check a little bit to say, "Hey, let's pump the brakes." And we'll do that when our client is freaking out, and we look at the deal and we see you don't need to be, right. Let's slow down a little bit here before you say, "Oh, it's not going to close the deal." This
Right.
is actually fairly normal. So let's
Yeah.
calm down a little bit. And then if they're really insistent, I might call you and I might
Yeah.
kind of be like, look, what, let's tighten this up a little bit. Let's do X, Y, or Z, or just some feedback. And I'll sanitize it so that it's not, sometimes people get emotional. They say, oh, the
Yeah.
guy's an idiot. Like he doesn't know what he's
Yes.
doing. I'm not going
Yeah.
to say that. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
no, I know they're speaking from emotion. They're
Right.
speaking from frustration. So you're right on that. And again, it's the communication. I wish more buyers would do this, where we just set up regular calls. And I
Yes.
recommend it on my deal, set up regular calls. Even if we have nothing to talk about, it'll be a nice
Yes.
quick call, but let's
Yes.
at least do it. Yeah.
Totally agree. Weekly calls are great. I encourage them. To your point, I know I'm talking to the guy this week. So if I don't like him, I can yell at him and get over it. If I love him, I can tell him. If he's delivering everything, we can say, let's push the date up a week. And if he needs to tell me something that I don't want to hear, at least he told me. I totally agree with that. And like on my side, on the buyer side, how do you get a sense on the seller's trust factor? How well can you trust the seller, right? So there's two or three things you must do in this instance, right? First off, you must understand why the seller is selling. When I first got into the business, I thought that was some nebulous pontification type question. Oh, I mean, he told me that, he's going from Colorado and he's moving to Maryland, so he had to sell the business, or he got tired and, he's been in it 10 years and he wants to do something else, or he's tired of it. And what I would say is that most times, the thing that a seller can do to give me trust initially is have a real compelling story on why he's selling, because people don't sell assets that are throwing off good cash that's going better for the buyer than the seller very often. Now it happens, but things like retirement, things like health issues, things like you already have a house in the Bahamas and your wife's about to leave you if you don't go move to that house. Those are things that at a visceral level I can understand. The ones that don't feel all that compelling because of the pain that people go through during due diligence, I question. So the first thing is just, why is the guy selling? The second thing is, it's almost a complete opposite of what I said about the buyer conveying trust. So when the seller, look, in all of these businesses, online, offline, this is not physics, like engineering, like I was when I was an undergrad. Like the numbers are not going to be exactly the same, folks. So understand there's going to be naturally some changes. But when the revenue matches the sales, matches what you see on the balance sheet, when all those things match consistently, and if something's going to be sort of grossly off, if the seller or the seller's broker tells you, hey, there's a big difference between taxes and financials. Let me tell you how private company tax preparation works and how nobody likes overpaying Uncle Sam. If they convey the old SHIT moments to you ahead of time, that's confidence. And then keep in mind the third way, and these are like three ways you got to sort of check for trust. Something negative is going to happen during your diligence process. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but almost every time something happens, right? Like that moment you talked about, like every deal has that. In that moment, does the person tell you when it happens, when they knew it was going to happen, the last minute, or not at all? And depending on how they bring that information to bear is a huge indication of how trustworthy you are. So for instance, one guy might say, hey, I got 3 salespeople, or I've got 2 marketers, and I'm hearing one might go away. And it would be a pain, but we could figure something out to replace him. I'm already putting a requisition out. I just want you to know in case it happens. That's on like the very proactive end, right? The other person, you look at interim financials halfway through your diligence process, and you see the marketing spend cut in half.
Right.
And so there's very different trust factors in those two ways. And there's others, but I think those 3 are very clear ways to check the trust.
Those are awesome. And as far as, how sellers handle themselves, for those that are potentially on the sell side, this is a point that we drive home quickly. Internally, Chuck at Quiet Light here, he coined a phrase, and I've been using it lately. We just call it "get ugly fast," right? We want to bring up the ugly stuff right away. My experience has been that buyers can handle the ugly; they can't handle surprises, right?
That's right.
It's when someone's surprised that they're like, "Wait, what else didn't you tell me now?" Like,
Yes.
that's bad. I can digest that, but I can't digest the fact that you thought you couldn't tell me that, right?
Had a call with the client this morning. He's like, Elliot, I have no issue with anything that happens to diligence, but if I get the sense that the person's not telling the truth about one thing, I'm going to think everything I have is crap.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the conversation we had earlier about the seller may be telling Mark, I don't think this guy can close. What my clients often tell me is, I think this guy's full of it.
Yeah.
And I have to have those same calm down conversations if I think the financials are right.
So I am going to disagree with you. This will be the first time that we've disagreed on this call, and that would be with the first point as to why somebody is selling. And what I'll disagree on might be just a nuance more than anything else. My experience, even as an entrepreneur myself, is that I don't think most sellers know why they're even selling fully, or there's this big mix of reasons that go together that don't make it really neatly into a single answer, right? It could be a mix of, right now we're 2021, right? And just went through 2020, one of the most tumultuous years to do business in the online world has been whiplash, right? A lot of our sellers, especially in the e-commerce space that were sourcing product from China, went through a period where they couldn't order product because China was shut down. Then they could order product, but Amazon was prioritizing products that weren't theirs. And so they couldn't stock their product. Meanwhile, demand was going through the roof for their product. And so it was this weird thing. And so that was stressful. And now they're having all these record sales, and they've always sort of thought about an exit. And now maybe they want, they're interested in another project because they're an entrepreneur. And so when I ask them, why are you selling? I get kind of this wishy-washy answer that feels a lot more like, I don't know. I just know it's the right time than something else.
That's fair.
But I mean,
hey, Mark, I mean, in reality, I think you bring up a good point. The reasoning and rationale for selling changes over time. Like 2020 is going to put a lot of people on the selling block, if you will, for sure. Because if you are in the last couple of years of your preference for owning a business, and a year like 2020 hits, I'm sure your phone's blowing up, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. Some of these folks won't have great reasons necessarily, but I honestly would say, like, as an entrepreneur, having been around entrepreneur for a long time, I think you sort of get what a reasonable one is and a not reasonable. And here's the other thing. One of the things we have to do on the diligence side is have some sense on how credible and full of integrity the mark in the room is, the sell side representative, right? Are they pitching deals that they're okay with the guy not actually selling because they already took a fee and they're cool? Do they bring a lot of businesses to market that don't close? And so again, like, from certain representatives, like seller representatives that I know like the background on the deal by the time I get it. And so I don't have as much worry. If it's a new person or I don't get the same warm fuzzy about integrity, it's different. So I think that's a fair rebuttal.
Yeah. No, and it's a useful question to ask. And what I would say is, for those that have been in tune with the marketplace, you can read into the answers pretty quickly, right? And sometimes you have to read between the lines. And there are some explanations which, look, yeah, they make sense. I'm retiring. That's what I'm doing. Okay, that's easy. I get that one. Some of them make sense. Some of them you kind of look at like, I think there's something else here. Right?
And I think the best thing to do in that instance is ask. I mean, I think a valid question is, talk to the seller about what he's going to do after he finishes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does he have a story? Does he have a plan? Even if it's, I'm working on a business that's got better margins than this, or I'm more interested in, like, well, tell me about this new thing that you're going to do. I like your old thing, but I think having a conversation.
It's all about conversations, I think, relating, right? And I heard a due diligence tip, which was just ask a lot of questions. Just be curious, like, and that's That's not a formal due diligence, of course. That's like basic stuff, but
I think to an extent it is. So here's what I think one of Guardian's best value adds really is. So there's an infinite number of questions you can ask as a buyer. You know, why is your sign yellow and not red? I mean, we can get to the level of, and you're buying the business, so it's unreasonable for a seller to not give you an answer. But what you really want to do in a process, because you have a time constraint, and extending the time pushes on the trust you're conveying to the seller, you actually want to ask not just a lot of questions, but the best questions, the most efficient questions, right? If it's an online business, me talking about your fixed asset registry and depreciation is a question that you can ask, but that's not going to be where the juice is, right? And also, like on our side, what we'll do is we'll take a look at a business, and within the first week, we'll sort of spread the financials, spread the metrics, take a look at different years, different views, and say, here are the top 3 to 5 issues we need to concern ourselves about. And then sort of almost put together work streams of how do we determine the sort of sanctity and sustainability of challenge 1, or challenge 2, or challenge 3. So we help people streamline the question asking process to get to the answers quicker, so they can get to comfort quicker, because to make the investment, you're going to need the comfort, and getting there in an efficient way is more helpful, because what happens, and you said it, you'll start with 5 issues you need to answer, and then you'll hear something about that business they divested 2 years ago, and it doesn't quite make sense, and you'll start asking all these questions, and all of a sudden you're 2 weeks into diligencing something that was divested 2 years ago, and you forgot about your 5 points. So we keep people in the guardrails around answering the questions that matter.
Yeah, that's a great segue, because we unfortunately do have to wrap up. I'm just looking at the clock, and we're running actually a little long for our typical episode length, but it's partly because I'm having a lot of fun talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a good segue. I would love to just, I gave a very brief scope of services that the Guardian offers. And I want to do this, guys, not as a sales pitch for Guardian necessarily. I do want to, thank you for your time and give you a chance to do this. But because I know the listeners of this podcast do skew towards buyers, and I know that there's a lot of, I get the questions all the time. Hey, do you have somebody that can look at a deal for me? Can you have somebody that can help me with something, or walk through this with me, or even the due diligence question? What are the scope of services that you guys offer at this point?
Sure. So I will start from the sort of beginning of phase of deals, and then push to sort of the later stage of deals. So initially, what we offer at the front end are 2 things. One is Diligence as a Service, which is a monthly service where we will help with almost any piece of the deal process you need help with, whether it's sourcing more deals because you're not looking at enough, whether it's evaluating the 10 deals you have in your pipe and you don't know which one or 2 are the best ones to look at, whether it's crafting indications of interest, letters of intent, and on and on and on. So we'll do all of that for a very reasonable monthly fee. The other thing we'll do are we'll review SIMs and financials. So you get a book from Mark or somebody else, and you're like, this stuff looks like Chinese to me. We'll sit with you for 2 hours, go through it, help you understand it, so you kind of know what you're looking at. So those are at the beginning stage of looking for folks that are still trying to find that deal they really like. Then when you get to the deal you like, we offer quality of earnings. So that's a complete financial assessment of the business, financial statements, taxes, bank statements, revenue, balance sheet, the whole thing, and help you actually get the financing from the bank if you're doing any of that, or even to talk to your investor base about it. We also have a quality of deal, which is our same quality of earnings service that also has a projection on the next 3 years of cash flow, a debt pay down schedule, so you know how close you are to being able to pay off your debt, because you don't want to default on that. And so that's another service we have. And then the final one that's sort of a major service is, let's say you're 2 or 3 weeks away from closing, you've done all this data analysis, you feel like you know what you're doing, but you're a little hesitant to really pull the trigger. We have what we call a red zone review. So we'll take a look at whatever analysis you've done to that point, use our sort of 10 years of expert analysis to sort of point out places you may have missed, or say, hey, I think you got most of it here, and give you more confidence closing that deal. So those are the scope of services from Guardian.
Yeah, when you're, again, we'll bookend this because we started it out this way. When you're looking to drop 6, 7, 8 figures on a deal, spending 4 or 5 on somebody to have a second set of eyes that's been doing this for 10 years, completely worth it. I mean, that's a no-brainer in this field. What's the best way, Elliott, for people to reach you if they want to just ask questions or talk to you or hear another war story?
Sure. So you can find me at guardianduediligence.com. That's DUE for do. I know it's long, but that's what we do. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Elliott Holland, ELLIOTT. And then when you go to the website, my phone number and email are there. I'm also very active on searchfunder.com for those that are on there. So any of those ways, I'm very responsive, and I love talking about deals. So we can have a chat whenever you like.
Awesome. Elliott, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I hope to have you on again in the future. We can talk more deals.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. Have a great one.